Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're investigating a piece of naval history that is, honestly, just profoundly shocking. We're talking about the violent, sudden end of the HMS Hood. I mean, how on earth does the most famous warship in the entire British Empire, literally viewed by the world as an invincible floating fortress, just get completely wiped off the map in mere minutes? Well, to figure that out, we're going to break down the timeline, dig into the forensic evidence of a massive fatal design flaw, and uncover the terrifying reality of what actually went down in the freezing waters of the Denmark Strait.
Okay, let's dive into this, because to really wrap your head around the magnitude of this disaster, you first have to grasp the ship's absolute legendary status. For 20 long years, 2 whole decades, the HMS Hood was the undisputed pride of the Royal Navy. She wasn't just a ship, right? She was this towering, massive symbol of British power projecting influence all across the globe. For 20 years, she reigned supreme as literally the largest warship in the world. When people looked at the Hood, they just saw absolute invincibility forged right there in steel.
But then, on a freezing cold morning in May 1941, that 20-year illusion of invincibility was just violently shattered. It took exactly 3 minutes for this massive, legendary fortress to vanish entirely beneath the waves. Seriously, just 3 minutes and one single German shell. That is literally all it took to erase 2 decades of absolute naval dominance and send a massive shockwave through the entire world.
And because the ship's destruction happened so incredibly fast, the human cost was just devastating. There were 1,421 crew members on board the HMS Hood that morning. When the ship was catastrophically torn apart, there was virtually zero time to launch lifeboats, deploy rafts, or even issue an organized evacuation order. In the blink of an eye, 1,421 men went down with the ship in those completely chaotic, terrifying final moments.
I mean, let that massive number sink in for a second. Over 1,400 men. Now, contrast that with this number, 3. Out of that huge, bustling crew, there were only 3 survivors. Just 3 guys out of the entire complement lived to tell the terrifying tale of what exactly happened when the pride of their navy was obliterated. To this day, the staggering event remains the largest single loss of life the Royal Navy has ever suffered from one vessel. It's just a profound tragedy that completely stunned the British public and forever altered the course of naval history. But to really grasp how a disaster of this immense scale even happens, we need to trace things back to the desperate tactical maneuvers of that fateful mission.
Which brings us to Section 1, the Battle of the Denmark Strait and intercepting the Bismarck.
Okay, let's map out how this builds. It's the morning of May 24, 1941. The heavily armed German battleship Bismarck and the cruiser Prinz Eugen make a break for the Atlantic Ocean. Their main goal? Attack vulnerable supply convoys and essentially starve Britain into submission. The British realize how grave this threat is, so they are absolutely desperate to stop them. They send in their heavy hitters, the brand new battleship Prince of Wales, and of course the legendary Hood. By mid-morning, the fleets intercept each other and engage. For a brief second, it looks like your standard, textbook naval battle. But then, moments later, a 15-inch shell from the Bismarck's guns finds its mark. That single 15-inch shell tore straight through the Hood's deck and plunged directly into her ammunition magazine. And the resulting explosion wasn't just big, it was absolutely catastrophic. The detonation of all that stored ammunition was so incredibly violent that it literally snapped this massive warship in 2. It's crazy to think about, but this wasn't some slow, dramatic sinking. It was a sudden, violent execution that tore the ship apart from the inside out. Moving into Section 2, the 3-minute mystery and the anatomy of a disaster. So we have to ask, why did this particular ship fail so spectacularly and so incredibly fast from just one single hit? Now, what's really interesting about the comparison we're looking at here is the profound technical mystery it highlights, because later in this very same mission, the British actually caught up to the Bismarck, right? And they hammered her with over 400 shells, firing nearly 3,000 rounds in total. And yet the Bismarck's heavily armored hull simply refused to go down from gunfire alone. So as an investigator, you're looking at this and thinking, how did the Hood, a ship of comparable prestige, massive scale, and reputation, fail and totally vanish after taking a single 15-inch shell?
Well, the answer comes down to a fatal design flaw. That single shell managed to find a critical soft spot in the ship's deck armor. It punched right through and ignited her magazines. But here's the absolute key detail that made it so devastating. This immense internal explosion happened while the massive ship was still fighting at full speed. She didn't slowly take on water and flood. Instead, she was shattered from the inside out before the bulk of the ship even slipped beneath the surface.
So the crucial point here is understanding the actual physical science of her sinking, and that really comes down to a concept called catastrophic implosion damage. Because the hood was torn open and dragged underwater so incredibly fast, she sank while her compartments were still totally full of trapped air. Think about the physics there. The massive pressure differential between the crushing deep ocean water outside and that buoyant air trapped inside violently shattered whatever was actually left of the ship's structure. She was effectively crushed by the ocean itself on her way down.
And this creates a really startling contrast when we look at the wreckage today. When the famous oceanographer Robert Ballard eventually discovered the wreck of the Bismarck, her hull was found to be remarkably intact. You might wonder why. Well, because her crew had opened the sea valves to intentionally scuttle her. She sank already completely flooded with water, which meant she entirely avoided that crushing pressure differential. But when a 2001 expedition finally reached the hood, it revealed a much more tragic fate. Because she suffered that massive internal explosion and sank so fast while still full of air, the catastrophic implosion damage left her violently snapped in two across the ocean floor.
Which brings us to our final section, a silent war grave and the final resting place.
And looking at this brilliantly illustrates the deeply tragic irony of their intertwined histories. I mean, the HMS Hood had this glorious active service life, spanning 20 long years. Yet her wreckage lies completely destroyed, violently snapped in two. The Bismarck, on the other hand, had an active operational career of literally only 8 days before she met her end. Yet her wreckage remains remarkably intact down at the bottom of the Atlantic. Two completely different lifespans, ending in two entirely distinct physical states of destruction. Today, regardless of the sides they fought on during the war, both of these wreckage sites are treated with the exact same reverence. Both the Hood and the Bismarck are formally designated as war graves and seamen's burial grounds. Under international maritime law, they're strictly protected. And impartially speaking, both the German and British governments are completely unified on this. They've mandated that these deep-sea sites be left entirely in peace, out of a profound, shared respect for the thousands of young men who went down with their ships.
Even though they represented opposing wartime powers and met vastly different physical ends, the Hood and the Bismarck are going to be linked forever by those 3 violent minutes in May 1941. It's just an incredibly sobering reminder of the terrifying, sudden power of naval warfare. It really shows you how quickly the tide of history, and honestly, the fate of thousands of lives, can just completely pivot on a single, well-placed shell.
Which leaves us with a fascinating, provocative question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. We've just seen how the seemingly invincible pride of the Royal Navy was absolutely shattered in just 180 seconds because of a hidden vulnerability. So what other unsinkable myths exist in our history? What other legendary ships or seemingly flawless engineering marvels might be hiding fatal design flaws just waiting for the exact wrong set of circumstances to unfold? I want you to really think about that. Keep questioning the history you think you know, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.